Welcome back to another episode of the HIT Podcast. My name is James Leighton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where I bring you real-life stories from some of the most interesting leaders of our sector. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Matt Harrison, Chief Executive of Great Places. Matt talks at length around mergers and acquisitions, having been through many in his career to date. We talk around the Homes England funding and how that might accelerate our housing crisis. And we also look at how we can attract more great people to our sector. If you like the podcast, I'd ask that you like and subscribe and that you share with your network. I hope you enjoy the show. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm in a good place, yeah, all good, absolutely fine.
Good. Always start here, but just for the benefit of the listeners, I've obviously done your overview, can never quite do it justice. Could you just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I live in Stockport. I was brought up in Sheffield. Spent a couple 3 years in the Midlands while studying, but came back north to Stockport in 1987 and ended up being here ever since, really. So, married, got two lads, both brought up here in Stockport, obviously. And funnily enough, both left home, but both kind of a little bit back at the minute. One's bought himself a house just round the corner.
Yeah.
And just very nice. It wasn't a bit unexpected, really. And the other one's, he's currently of no fixed abode. That's what
right. That's how he put it. Yeah. I understand you're a Sheffield Wednesday fan as well, someone told me.
Yeah, afraid so. A lot of my financial and emotional effort goes into Sheffield Wednesday. Yeah, it's a habit from the school days. Frank, I kind of I go watching them home and away, and I do really enjoy it, and I find it kind of gives me a connection back to my home city. So there's something a bit special about it, to be honest. Even though the team is useless most of the time, still in touch with mates from school days, and if it wasn't for the Wednesday, that wouldn't be the case. There's nothing else particularly in common with them from that kind of era. But yeah, football does that for you. So yeah, I'll go for it.
Nice. And I mean, I looked, obviously, when I was doing some prep for this, I looked at your journey so far, but just talk us through the early days. How did you get into housing? What was the journey for you into that sector, really? And how did you get into the sector?
Yeah, well, at school, I was a bit of a geography head. I always liked the kind of spatial stuff. So when I went to uni, followed that kind of bit boring middle class path, went to uni kind of thing. I did a geography degree, and part of that was a subsidiary about high-rise living and the building boom of the late 50s and early 60s, and I just found it really, really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And amongst everything that I did whilst I was there, I kind of got the housing bug as a result of that. So when I finished my degree, I hadn't got a clue what I wanted to do really. So I thought I'd try to dig out another course and stretch it out another year. So I got myself on a master's doing housing policy, and from there, I just kind of, again, the interest was kind of spiked by that and continued really. So I thought I'd try to work for a local authority or work for a housing association, and I got offered a job by what was then North Cheshire Housing Association, based in Stockport, just around the corner, which is why I'm living in Stockport still. And as a development officer, and that was my first ever job, rocked up and sent me on a building site with a pair of muddy boots, and I was thinking, crikey, what have I done? Because I was nice lefty politics, all that kind of thing. Didn't want anything to do with the building industry at all. Thought it was a PR job, and I clearly hadn't read the job description very well. But shortly afterwards, realised I really enjoyed it, and all these years later, still a major interest of mine is the development industry.
Yeah, I was going to say it's very few CEOs that I've spoken to will come from that path. I'm sure there are people that have done that path, but what were the challenges for you to develop? Because I mean, getting to chief exec from a development officer, you've done really well, but clearly there'll have been some things you've had to upskill yourself and learn. What were the key learns for you in that period?
Well, I suppose the thing I would have had to concentrate on, like everybody, the numbers piece and all that kind of thing. But the customer service bit is one which I've always had to found it really interesting, and my colleagues are managing the products which we produce as development people. That's really important. So getting the design right, learning from mistakes, because there's plenty of bumps in the road, and plenty of kind of fashion disasters in the development world, which I've helped participate in over the years. So I'm really interested in that. But kind of the social purpose piece has always been floating around in my world, and wanting to do something worthwhile. So I never really wanted to work for a private sector house builder. I've always wanted to do something which has got that social purpose. So I think it's been working in development, you get that kind of nice mixture of you're dealing with the private sector, you're dealing with people coming from a different angle to you, but half of you is being demanding about the customer experience at the end of it. So that's been something which has I've had to concentrate on. As I became chief exec, had to really kind of ensure that I was balanced in my approach, if you like, rather than just being fixated on development, tempting though it always was.
and in terms of that, the one thing that always strikes me is, like, you've obviously been around development for a long time. What's changed, firstly in the sector, but secondly, what's changed in development since when you were development officer?
I think it's miles harder now, fundamentally.
Right.
When I started it, the kind of project planning thing was pretty straightforward, really. And I seem to recall it being pretty straightforward. And now, when I'm reading the reports which are produced by my colleagues now, I'm thinking, crikey, I wasn't having to do all this stuff. And it all just sounds miles harder than it used to be. It takes miles longer as well. And obviously planning has changed a lot, and the local authorities are terribly under-resourced, so that can take forever. So yeah, those sorts of things really. But the old days, my recollection, it was a miles more straightforward experience than it is now.
Yeah, everyone says the same thing. I had Tom Bloxham on, and I know you know Tom, and he was saying the same thing. He said, like, back in the day it was 5 months and 50 grand. It's now 15 months and 500 grand. So he was like, it's changed and it's more expensive to get things done now. But I suppose we move with the times. And I suppose, to get onto the sort of the present day, just give us a helicopter view of Great Places as we sit here today.
Yeah, well, the organisation went through a merger last, when was it, about 18 months or so ago.
Yeah.
So we now own about 25,000 properties, very much a northern organisation. We've got a few bits and pieces in Stoke, but fundamentally it's a northern English organisation, which is something very, very key to kind of emphasise. Most of the stock is in Greater Manchester, but we also got quite a portfolio over in Sheffield City region.
Right.
And we also work around the whole area of Lancashire, up onto the Fylde coast as well, going as far north as Lancaster. So so we kind of the organisation's got a big footprint in terms of local authorities, and that's we're a traditional housing association, so we've got little bits of stock transfer in there from
of course,
local authorities. Most of the stuff's been organic growth, and through mergers over the years, we've merged with different organisations probably half a dozen times now, and each time that brings a different geographical footprint, brings different cultures together and all that kind of thing. But it's kept the organisation, I'd like to think, an interesting place, because we don't stand still at Great Places. We're always trying to move on in some way or another. And because we've had the development programme, we've been able to grow organically, and so that's been great as well.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, you've touched on it, but mergers, you've been at the forefront of a number of mergers. What a couple of things in that. The equity one felt like a big one. What did you inherit when you merged with equity? What was the state of the business? Where did you have to get it to sort of merge the two together and get that unique but unified culture? Yeah,
that's an interesting question, to be honest, because some mergers come about because an organisation's got itself into a financial pickle, and it's got to happen for commercial reasons. And 2 or 3 of the ones we've done over the years have been on that kind of basis. But this one was different because equity didn't need to merge with another organisation. I think the board just ultimately took the view that if they wanted to deliver on their corporate objectives, then they would always be struggling, given their size of organisation. They were never going to have the financial wherewithal to deliver on all the things that they wanted to deliver on. So they went to the market rather than anything else. They went out and they chose a partner. So we were contacted and asked if we would like to pitch in for it. So we did. For us, it was a really obvious organisation to look at. We weren't kind of in the market particularly. I wasn't told by my board to go knocking on doors and try and find merger partners. Equity's footprint for us was perfect. The GM piece, they have stock in Manchester and Trafford, but primarily in Stockport. And Stockport is the one local authority which Great Places didn't have any stock in Greater Manchester. So we had stuff in 9 out of the 10. But the one we couldn't get into was Stockport, and tried for years and years and years. Had a really strong housing partnership, and getting past Andy in Stockport Council and doing anything in Stockport was virtually impossible. So for that reason, it was great. And also they got a footprint in Sheffield City region as well. So Sheffield, Rotherham, Barnsley, which was spot on for us. So the geography had a remarkable synergy. So it made a lot of sense for us for a whole host of reasons to stick our hat in the ring for it, really. And these opportunities don't come along very often.
Well,
so
I was going to ask you that actually. Yeah, what goes into the thinking when you decide to merge with the business? Is it just stock, or are there other factors that you think about? I mean, there's lots of factors clearly, but what are the main factors that you'd look at in that situation, would you say?
Yeah, well, you do look at the geography of stock, and obviously you run the rule over the numbers as well, and looking for things around unencumbered assets, because our business is based on borrowing money. So your typical housing association goes to the markets to borrow funding over the long term. So in theory, you can run out of assets to borrow against. So one thing we look at is the unencumbered assets in an organisation. But fundamentally, you're also looking at culture and hoping that you are going to go with an organisation where there is some synergy. It's never going to be the same, and obviously in the Great Places and Equity scenario, we're quite a bit bigger than they were. So I can imagine that their colleagues there would have probably been thinking, God, big organisation coming, they're going to cause havoc with the equity culture. Whereas we were thinking, well, we can, great things happen at Equity. We think there are things we can do better. There are things that they can teach us. So we kind of went into it on that basis. Both organisations had a similar historical background, traditional organisations, rather than stock transfer organisations. So there were aspects of cultural affinity. Of course, for me personally, I started my career there, so I was kind of thinking, crikey, this is a nice one. So I was bang up for it all the way through.
And what I mean, you go through the merger, all that happens. What's the sort of first 5 or 6 things that need to be done when you actually go to that day one with merged businesses together? What are the sort of things practically that you've got to get done to make sure that the business still thrives and still operates for customers, tenants, etc.? What do you have to do in that sense?
Well, for us, it was all a bit weird because it happened in the pandemic. So So the kind of normal rule book was ripped up and chucked in the bin because it happened. So the first fundamental thing that was missing, there was no celebration. What we really wanted to do was have a celebration, bring the new colleagues and old and existing colleagues together, and really we wanted to talk about a new organisation. We didn't want it to be perceived as a Great Places takeover of Equity. Despite size differences, we wanted to be talking about the creation of a new organisation with a kind of best of both approach. Acknowledging that Great Places didn't have all the answers, and there was plenty of good stuff going on in Equity which we could learn from, as I said before, really. So we had that opportunity pinched off us a little bit because we just couldn't do it. So it kind of all went under the radar, and it was kind of just done. Signed a piece of paper, and it's happened. So we had to think hard about how we, on the cultural side, how we engaged with our new colleagues. Because for a lot of people in Great Places, they probably thought, well, if I'm working in Lancashire, it makes sense to me. There's the colleagues who are working perhaps in similar patches where they might be thinking, what's going to happen with this? We had to work hard, and the pandemic, ironically, gave us 1 or 2 opportunities to talk to new colleagues in a slightly different way than we'd planned, and to do 1 or 2 nice things as well. So, for example, in the height of it, we decided to have a family day off. So I think it was in July. We just said to everybody, we're shutting the business, let's have a day off. It's been terrible. So it gave us a chance to do 1 or 2 nice things, and I think that was quite helpful, really, because it meant we took things away from the BAU and all that kind of thing. We were just able to do a couple of nice things and make new colleagues realise that this big organisation wasn't full of ogres. And actually, we're all right. We might expect, and want to talk in a business-like way, but we can do that in a nice way, with an empathetic way. So that was a big focus for us in terms of answering the question, was around trying to engage with people who you couldn't physically engage with. We had to put a lot of thought into that.
I saw that actually. Like, I follow you guys on LinkedIn quite a lot, and I saw that you did quite a lot of staff conferencey stuff, some virtual. You really did embrace the whole engagement piece, didn't you? Was that part of the agenda because of the merger, or are you an organisation that just loves that staff employee engagement?
Yeah, we do. I think we do enjoy doing it, but I think that again, the irony of the pandemic is it makes you reflect on how whether you're doing it very well or not. So,
Of course.
we reflected and put some more effort into trying to do those things. So for example, I mean, I've done a vlog every week now for about a year and a half. So I've never done that before. So I'd like to be quite a visible chief executive if I can, but I was relying on kind of the physical means to do that, and obviously this demonstrated that you actually get more visibility by doing things in a slightly different way. So I've done a load of that. We introduced kind of speaking sessions, called them space to talk sessions, where various different subjects people could just rock up on a call, a Zoom type call, and just have a kind of chat mouse conversations.
Right.
So we introduced all those sorts of things, which we didn't previously particularly do, although we thought we were an organisation that was really committed to engagement, and we've always had very good engagement scores from colleagues. You know, we get on the pitch score. The latest one was 82%, 84%, something like that. So that's incredible, really. That people,
it really is.
Yeah, I think it was 96% of colleagues said they understood the vision and values of the organisation and were committed to. So
yeah, of course.
that's something to work with when you've got that, and really demonstrates that you put your effort into communication, that you get a big bang for your buck, really, and people respond to it. So we do try hard with that, and we did a virtual conference as well, which was, that worked pretty well as well. And
it's all very new, isn't it? It's all very new. It does feel it. And what changes for you as a leader? I'm interested to understand, sort of, as you've built and got bigger as an organization, what does your role turn into, and what does it change? Does it change a lot, or does it become more of a stakeholder management piece? Like, what has been the main changes for your role?
Yeah, well, I think for me personally, I think some chief execs spend the vast majority of the time doing external facing things. Yeah. And I try and strike a bit of a balance, really. I don't want to be the sort of person people in the office don't know and feel nervous about and all that kind of thing. And I have to try and balance that off with the need to do the external facing thing and the stakeholder management. So for me, the roles which strike that balance between being visible, being accessible to your colleagues, rather than necessarily being perhaps in some kind of ivory tower where you're untouchable, and combining that with some of the external stuff, and which is where I think some of my background, hopefully in development, starts to play through a little bit, because I appreciate the power of partnerships in terms of getting things over the line. So I guess that probably have to ask other people whether I'm any good at it or not. But that's my kind of approach to it, really.
Well, I mean, I think out of everyone I've ever met or interviewed, you've probably done the most mergers. So where are the lessons learned from a merger, and where have been the pitfalls for you, and what would you do differently if you were to do another merger?
Yeah, well, the first one we did was of an organisation called First Peterloo, and that was back in 1996. You've probably never heard of them.
I've not.
They were a specialist supported housing organisation. Did some really interesting stuff, actually. They did the first housing, maybe in the country, certainly in the north of England, for people with HIV and AIDS, specifically for that client group in an era, of course, where there was that shocking discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. So they were doing that sort of stuff. They also ran a heavy drinkers hostel in central Manchester, in Russia, which we continue with to this day. It's not a dry hostel; it's a wet one. So the management philosophy is around helping the customers to manage their drinking. So it's not a kind of pious, unless you stop, you can't come in type of thing. It's about helping them to manage their lifestyle and leaving it to them to make the choice, if you like, to stop when they're ready to. So that kind of was that organisation got in a financial mess. So to try and answer your question, they got in a financial pickle, but they were kind of, because the council, Manchester Council at the time, got sick of some of the antics in that organisation, because they were doing interesting stuff, but they were doing some other stuff as well. So we learned quite a lot from that in terms of how to kind of sort out a financial mess of a situation, and basically taking tough decisions, which the housing sector doesn't always easily do. So we learned about taking tough decisions. and that involved the closure of some stuff which was financially just not feasible going forward. So we learned from that. Other ones I mentioned in terms of equity, the cultural piece really, and the need to ensure fundamentally the culture fits really, really well. I think that's something which I don't recall talking about an awful lot in previous mergers, which have perhaps been driven by crisis, and something's got to happen here.
Yeah, of course.
So we step in and deal with the crisis.
Yeah.
This was different, and this one we talked miles more about culture than we talked about numbers, and I think that was an interesting shift, and probably one which was at least in part because of the way equity did what they did, but also because times have changed and people understand and recognise that cultural fit is actually critical for long-term success. And unless you have the conversation, then you're perhaps risking blindly stepping into spaces and creating issues which take you an awful long time to unravel and can cause some heartache along the way. So this time, the approach was a bit different with it, and time will tell whether what we've got right and what we haven't got right. But we talked about it an awful lot and talked about cultural fit, bringing 120 new colleagues into a business which was larger and might have felt a bit domineering and that kind of stuff, and just trying to make people feel comfortable, make them feel at home, make them want to be part of the business going forward and stay and contribute.
It is an amazing story, and I totally agree on the culture piece. I think the thing that I've noticed in my role over the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe more recently, is culture is everything in an organization now in terms of retention. If you're looking at having a well engaged workforce, culture is everything. And actually, I think businesses are putting much more focus on that. And honestly, I think people make recruitment choices now based on culture and where they're going to work as an organization based on culture, not money now, which it used to be financial, other elements, flexibility. I think now it's working with a business that matches their values and ethos.
Yeah, so. I mean, obviously we've got a job of work to do to make sure that we people who work for the organisation feel that they're getting paid the going rate in the marketplace. And again, so but if you get that right, then yeah, absolutely, then you're into hoping that your culture fits with people. And of course, with housing associations, that's something which we should have a head start on to some degree, because we're doing something of social value, businesses with a social purpose, and it's not for everybody, but for a lot of people, that is important. And so there's a story for us to tell there.
Of course, and it's hearts and minds, isn't it? I think in the sense of anyone that I've ever placed into a leadership role in housing associations could have probably gone and got better financial rewards in the private sector. But actually, the sector's great. Like what we offer as a sector is much better than going and earning some more financial rewards. So I get that. One thing that came up in the press recently, obviously, the Homes England funding. I wanted to talk to you around great places, but development. But talk us through the Homes England funding, because the way I read it is, if you look at it from the amount of homes over the next 5 years, you were the largest on the list, but you weren't the largest organisation on the list. So you really have got an appetite for development. Ironically, the chief exec comes from a development background, but I suppose. What talk us through that process, because obviously lots of people got funding. Just what's your understanding of how that's going to benefit the housing crisis, and also what your part of that's going to be?
Yeah, well, for a number of years now, the organisation has had a relatively big development programme, and I think if you ask any of our key stakeholders what the organisation's USP is, they'll probably say development. Now, we have to try and make sure that we balance that out, because we are we're a landlord. We do a lot of supported housing. We do lots of other activities as well. We're a council body for Housing First and working with Rough Sleepers in Manchester. So it's not all development, but a lot of our stakeholders would have it down as our USP.
Yeah,
so we've had a long-standing relationship with Homes England and Housing Communities Agency, and before that, and Housing Corporation before that. I think that's my name's right. And always bid for and succeeded with getting these kind of programme based allocations of funding as they've matured over the years. Mm-hmm. So we were on the wave one strategic partnerships 3 or 4 years ago, and managed to expand that as well. So when this second lot came out for bidding, it was a no-brainer for us to want to participate in that.
Yeah.
The programme runs to March 2028 as well. So that's a long time frame, a much longer time frame than we used to work into. one of the problems for the sector I've always thought is that we kind of lurch from funding settlement to funding settlement. So you going into a conversation on a a lengthy regeneration scheme, and you're saying, well, yeah, I can commit the first X, but I can't commit to anything beyond that. It's not a really helpful kind of position to be in, really.
No, agree.
So we kind of just wanted to continue with a big program. Clearly got to balance that out against our other commitments around zero carbon and building safety and customer service, those sorts of things. But sort of the view that we can just, over that time frame, if we can just nail a healthy program, then it puts it in a box almost. The funding's in place. We can go get private finance. We can get on with that. With the ability to have a conversation with developers and local authorities about not saying we're in for the first 50, 70 homes, but saying we're in. And
we're in.
The next 5 years, we're in. Yeah. It makes a massive difference to the conversation, really. So that's that. So we were keen to achieve SP status, and then what happened was that when the details came out, there were certain criteria. So you had to bid big. So we would have bid big anyway, but you had no choice but to bid big. So that's what we did, and we were obviously thrilled to get £241 million. I mean, it's a bit of a pinch yourself on the arm moment, really.
I was going to say, it's huge.
It's huge. It's a vast sum of money. And we've now got to match it off with the private finance, but that basically it's a £1 billion program that we've got to deliver now. So it's huge, and it's going to be very testing. And thankfully we've got a brilliant development team with Helen Spencer as our director of development. So she'll no doubt she'll have a few sleepless nights. But,
I was going to say Helen's awesome, but she's got a job on her hands. Yeah. But I mean, look, it's exciting for the sector, and not just your funding, but I mean, there's a lot of money there, and there's a lot of houses, and about time, may I say, that people are going to start to develop much needed homes. But in terms of what it means for your aspirations, did it change it, or was your aspirations always at that level?
Yeah, we had when we signed up our corporate plan 3 or 4 years ago, we had an aspiration to build, and then we did the merger. So we had an aspiration at first to build 9,000 homes over 10 years, I think it was, and then through the merger, there was a kind of development premium at the time, which we talked about, because Equity, they had development ambitions as well, which they couldn't deliver on. So we ended up with a target of 11,000 homes over 10 years. So this is a big chunk of that, and we will reflect on that target. Now we've got a big chunk of it in the bag. We've got 1,000 homes on site right now. So we've then got another 5,000 to do. So we're kind of well on our way with that. So we just need to press on and reflect on some of the other changes taking place in our operating area and decide whether we want to continue at that level or whether we want to reflect on it and decide what to do.
Yeah. Well, when you're looking at a development program, what do you do in terms of layering that over your current heat map of properties? Do you look at areas where you're sparse? Do you look at areas where you're very heavily? What's the plan generally when you go out and look at that?
We generally, virtually, well, more or less exclusively, we focus on the areas where we've got stock.
Yeah. Okay.
If we've got gaps, then we might try to fill the gaps.
Yeah.
We don't go anymore. We used to. We don't anymore go knocking on doors of local authorities who are where we haven't got a basis really. So it tends to be where we are now. Maybe fill in some gaps. Big focus on the urban areas. We do some rural stuff. We are fundamentally an urban organisation.
Yeah. And how does that work how does that translate into land, and how do you procure land? Do you do it through partners? Do you do it through developers? Like, how are you currently in that process?
Yeah, mixed economy, really. Okay. We do a bit through buying stuff through Section 106 agreements off developers, but that's never been a big part of our business. Big chunks of it are land-led, so we source the land ourselves and take it right through.
Right.
And that's where the development team comes in. And a lot of halfway house stuff whereby we'll find SME developers in particular who will approach us with a piece of land they've got planning on and maybe got the land optioned or acquired, and try and do a deal with us, and then we'll sit down with them and try and influence the design to make sure we're going to get the design we want and the build quality that we want. And if we can get to a happy place with them, we'll just do those sorts of deals and then manage them. So through the process, real mixed economy of efforts, really.
I was going to say, and I appreciate that 4,920 homes. Has that changed the core the typical site that you want, because I mean, you can't do that in 50 unit sites, can you now? Really, it's going to be tough.
Peeping over fences and looking over pub garden walls, it's not good enough anymore. No, so no doubt, plenty of people will have seen those numbers and be knocking on the door saying, "I've got this." Choose wisely for those sorts of things. But hopefully, it does change the nature of the conversation with local authorities and large developers. Hopefully, so we've got a number of partnership arrangements with organisations, of long-standing relationships with different organisations. So I'd hope that we'd be able to get into a few deals whereby they're 5, 6, 7, 800 home developments where we can take 200 or 300 over a 4 or 5 year period and spread out the social housing across the schemes to make genuine aspirational mixed tenure environments where people really, really want to put down roots and stay put and make happy lives. That's something for us, and we've got a number of those irons in the fire on longer term deals like that. Also got there's obviously some significant opportunities as well though. So in Stockport, for example, there's the Mayoral Development Corporation area. So if we could do a couple of projects in there, that'd be great news. And
absolutely,
there's the other things across Greater Manchester and over in Sheffield in particular, where from my perspective, I could argue very strongly and persuade myself that we should be the ideal
partner. They might knock down Sheffield Wednesday Stadium. You never know. You could build on that.
Well, it needs knocking down. It was built in 1960, wasn't
it? Just one final thing on development then. Land is obviously at a premium in the marketplace. Anything the country can do to open up more land? What would you do if you could change anything around that land provision at the moment?
Well, I think what's happening in Greater Manchester right now is interesting, because we had the big conversation about the spatial framework a year or so ago, and around green belt being released for development, and that obviously caused quite a lot of controversy, and the document was removed and has just been republished, so it's out for consultation now, renamed as Places for Everyone, and that leads strongly on brownfield first, which I think I would and we would corporately agree with, brownfield first, but also does recognise that there's not going to be enough brownfield land to provide sufficient homes for the demand that there is. People living in urban areas need green spaces too. There's also great competition for land in urban areas, so you can't just cover it all in high density residential. It's not a sensible thing to do. So I think again, it's back to balance and back to a mixed environment really. And for me personally, I don't think the green belt should be sacrosanct, and there's plenty of green belt which isn't, it's not a beautiful rolling meadow with sheep gambling around it.
Of course it's not. No,
some of it's not very nice actually. So why don't we have a sensible look and try and find the balance which respects the green belt, respects green spaces, respects all that, because people in the urban areas like access to nearby green belt where it's nice, don't they? So respect all that. Equally, let's have a mature conversation about what society needs, especially for younger people, because the marketplace is not helpful. Not everyone's going to be like I was, able to buy a house at 22 years old. It's just not possible anymore, because of the house prices and the private rents, which are astronomical. So it's back to my lad, and currently being of no fixed abode, he's given up on his rental accommodation because he can't afford to do what he wants to do. And it's not like he's not working either. He's working, but he's trying to do a master's degree in arts, and he can't do it all. So he's decided to be of no fixed abode.
Yeah, the gap's getting big. The gap is getting bigger. I mean, it is getting bigger. I mean, I know we're trying to close it, but it is getting bigger. I think there's a lot of disused space as well. I keep hearing people talk about garages, disused space. All these we could do, and we could be cleverer around how we're using some of these areas in the city, especially to develop, because they're easy ones. Like, I know you do a lot of work, and I want to talk to you about JV and collaboration, but you do some work with Urban Splash, and you have done in the past. But they've done some great things in the city on tiny strips of land. I mean, literally tiny strips of land, and put 10 houses there. If you look at Piercy Street in Manchester,
we did. We took a few on there and turned them on shared ownership, and they proved to be quite popular, or very popular, which was great. No, absolutely. I think the thing with the tight urban areas, it's about the quality, isn't it? So we're about to do the Coates dispensary. That's fun and games on that one. But I think we need to be careful about quality, and we need to have a conversation about our town centres. And so I'm living in Stockport, so I can talk about Stockport for a second or two. But we need to make sure that some of the office buildings and the retail spaces aren't turned into cheap and nasty housing, because no one is going to benefit from that in the long term. So
No,
design quality is really important. I think there's some real tensions in all our town centres about what the next 10 to 30 years and beyond holds for them, and how they're going to repurpose themselves as attractive
yeah.
mixed commercial residential spaces, and just converting unused office blocks into cheap, not even cheap and cheerful, cheap and nasty residential is surely not part of the answer.
It's not the answer. On Stockport, a couple of minutes, just because I really want to talk about it, because I want to get your view on it, having been there for so long. I'm a local Stockport. I live in Stockport.
Yeah.
What are they going to do with Stockport? Because it's got a main train line in. I've thought this for years. It's got a main train line in. Every train stops in Stockport. It's got a really crazy development opportunity for me to really make that a really cool centre and town centre. But it's never been done, has it? Why is that? And what could we? It's just not been carved out as the way it could have been. I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've got a lot of time for the town. I've been here now for all these years. I never really thought about moving on. It's got so much going for it.
Of course.
In terms of its hinterland, it's got a pretty wealthy hinterland. There are parts of Stockport which aren't so wealthy, but it's got the Heatons on the doorstep. It's got Bramall on the doorstep.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who live in those parts of Stockport historically have not used the town centre.
Agree.
Particularly. And I know people live in Bramall. They say, "Where do you live?" They say, "I'm from Bramall." But they don't say from Stockport.
Yeah, of course.
That affinity with the town. I think that's changed in the last few years. Things like the Foodie Fridays thing on the Friday nights, that brings in 1,000 people into the town centre. The Market Square's looking very nice now. Things like the Baker's Vaults and one or two other pubs which have kind of revamped themselves and reinvented themselves, and Stockport's turning a corner, and Hillgate and the Underbanks all down there. Some lovely stuff going on down there, and I think the council deserve a lot of praise for how they've sought over the last few years to think about what they want of Stockport town centre and the future of it, and recognising that the Mersey retail piece is going to die on its knees, isn't it? So we've lost Marks and Spencers, we've lost BHS, we lost Debenhams, lost a big co-op. So they've gone and they're coming back. So it's now turning into an attractive leisure. Architecturally, it's nice in the town centre. It's got a nice leisure offer in terms of pubs and restaurants, and a lot of independent stores springing up. And obviously, the pandemic was a threat to that, but it doesn't seem to have not to have abated really. So I think the future's bright, and I think the Development Corporation is great. Dealing with the transport interchange is fantastic. I think the A6 is a massive problem because it slices that. You mentioned the stations to town centre. You've got to get over the A6 first. It's just not. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they're ever going to do about that. But that's need to find a way to make it a bit less hostile kind of environment getting over the A6.
Agree. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It could be great. I mean, I'm not saying it's not great. I love Stockport. And I'm from Bramall, so I don't say Bramall, I say Stockport. But I love Stockport. I just think it's such an amazing opportunity. It could be an Altrincham, for example. They've done some great things in Altrincham. Easily be an Altrincham, but needs more boutique shops and boutique restaurants and all this stuff that comes with that. But I think
that's about footfall. You've got to get the people coming in. For the people going to come in with a few bob in the pocket, then those businesses will be right there queuing up to come into the town.
Absolutely.
And if we could find a way to do something with the river as well, that would be fantastic. So we've got a river going bang through the middle of our town with some shopping centre built on stilts over it. So
I mean, I wouldn't even know there was one. So to be honest, you probably just educated me a little bit on Stockport. And as we look to the future and look at, we probably answered some of this, but like, what can be done to solve or to help accelerate the housing crisis, would you say? I mean, the funding helps and all that sort of stuff. What else could we do you think, in terms of just really accelerating the housing crisis? Because it seems to be getting wider.
Yeah, well, clearly a kind of fundamental mismatch between supply and demand. So we just need to be building more homes. Personally, in the affordable housing sector, I think the right to buy is a shame. Kind of understand, I suppose, to some degree, a desire to provide opportunities for people to buy homes for own occupation. But if you're losing social stock and not replacing it, that's not great. because it just that mismatch between supply and demand just gets worse. So we just need to find ways to build more across all sectors. And part of that in the urban context, it's got to be it's going to be brownfield first. How are we going to fund the industrialization of some of this land? Is this the principle of polluter pays? Great, isn't it? But a lot of this stuff was done 150 years ago. They've long gone. These guys have long gone. So basically, the state is going to have to step in and deal with decontaminating large swathes of brownfield land, which would, there's a preparedness to do that. Then that would be good. I personally, again, would like to see local authorities emboldened more to use CPO to get control of complicated land holdings. Again, especially in the heart of the urban area, it's really complicated. All sorts of people in there holding people to ransom for this, that, and the other. And the best way to deal with that is a strong local authority going in and saying, right, we're going to sort this out, everybody, and with the financial clout to do that. So those things would really, really help, and around strategically planned regeneration is really a bit of a kind of a thing. And if we could get on with that, long-term programs supported by the state, private sector, skills to drive things forward, housing associations absolutely in the mix as well. I think you've got it all there, really.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And one of the other things I always ask, and this is probably selfish, but I love having people on that are passionate about the sector, and it's amazing to see how many people are passionate. But how do we get that next generation of talent involved in our great sector and into housing associations, into public sector, and really, really enjoying the roles that they're doing? How do we do that?
Got to be better at selling our story.
Yeah.
We recruit graduates into great places and apprentices. And it's about finding a way, as they're coming out of university, for them to think this is a place for them, and that they can have good careers, and they can go home on a Friday after a hard week's work and think, I've done something fulfilling and worthwhile with my working week.
Yeah.
Not necessarily lining the pockets of other people, buying so and so his third yacht over in the south of France or whatever. So I'm doing. So I might not be retiring at 45 or 50 on the strength of what I've earned in the sector, but I'm doing something really, really worthwhile, and I can earn sufficient money to have a good lifestyle. So I've got an amazing story to tell in terms of what we do. Not-for-profit thing is a really great story. I think I've always been very much attracted to that, and I think if we can tie social purpose to the environmental agenda and those sorts of things, then we really, really, really should have an amazing story to attract a whole pile of talent into the sector without a shadow of doubt.
You've just hit the nail on the head for me. Certainly, when I do college and university talks quite frequently in the role I do, and the green agenda and just all of the sustainability stuff that's going on is the real appeal now to the next generation. And so we need to be spinning that story better, in my opinion. Like you say, it's the biggest appeal for those people in most cases. I mean, not everyone's the same, but I really, really see that that's the future. And I suppose as we wrap up, last couple of things. Firstly, if you were to advise government, or you could change one thing about the sector, or one thing that would help us accelerate the sector, what would it be? What would you do?
Oh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? What would I do? I mean, I guess I would like to think we can stop. As a sector, we're kind of always a bit of a funny position, to be honest, because we do great things. During the pandemic, we did some amazing things to support our customers and communities. So we do fantastic things. All that social purpose stuff really comes out. We don't ever seem to be the best mates of government, whether that's Labour or Conservative. And we move with the times. Really. It's only 4 or 5 years ago, isn't it? We had to endure a rent cut, a 4-year rent cut.
Awesome.
From what at the time was a hostile government to the sector. So I guess for me, I'd love to find a way of positioning ourselves such that people understand and recognise that we are forces of good. And we clearly don't get it right all the time. There's been some difficult TV coverage, hasn't there, recently? So we clearly don't get it right all the time.
Of course.
Fundamentally, we are forces of good. We do a good thing in society. And as organisations, the money which we make all gets recycled in this kind of virtuous circles. There's all sorts of things there which are what's not to like.
Yeah.
How do we get to ourselves to a position whereby both the main parties from time to time just aren't that keen on us. And if we could get to ourselves to a position whereby contribution is more widely acknowledged as being a positive thing, then that would be great, because then it would make planning our businesses much easier. It would make investing much easier. It would make everything smoother process, really, rather than kind of lurching around as you feel. Sometimes I feel like a bit of political football, booting around a little bit. So I guess that'd be one thing I would change, is get our narrative and our storytelling right, so it lands better.
I think that narrative is important, but also, you look at how much of the housing stock in the UK is social, and you think the government need to get the efficiency bandings to band C very soon. They probably need the housing sector quite a lot to rely on that, really.
And that's a great example, because if we had better clarity about future funding for retrofitting and doing whatever we need to do to our existing stock, that again would just make your business planning easier. At the minute, we know what we've got to do, and we know we probably can't afford it, because as a sector we don't churn our stock, we keep it. So Great Places owns over 1,000 pre-1919 terraced houses. Now, what do we do with those? Do we exit those areas and leave them to the private market? Well, I can't imagine for a second that we're going to do that. So they're ours, they're lived in. The days of knocking down that sort of stuff has gone. No one's knocked down a terraced house, as far as I can make out, for about 10 years now. So if we invest all our effort and money in dealing with the carbon agenda in that stock, that means we're not building any new stuff. So we've got to find that balance, and government coming to the table with a long-term strategic plan about funding.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Like, everyone I speak to, I was on a leadership day the other day with some chief execs, and they were all saying the same thing. Like, if you look at build more houses, building safety, and efficiency band C, and net zero carbon, where do you put your money in the three? You can't do them all. So at some point, something's going to have to give, because you can't afford to do all of those things on all fronts. And to be honest, the retrofit conversation is really interesting, something I'm passionate about, because in some cases, it's going to cost a fortune to get these houses to efficiency band C, I think.
With the social sector, we'll have a good go at the social sector, then you'll have organisations who are prepared to put money in, because we'll expect it all for nothing. Our history of development is mixed financial model. So you should find organisations who wanted to be partners of government in giving it. You also can learn a lot of lessons and learn how to scale it up, and learn how you can then transfer the technology and the skill into the private sector, and work out how you're going to do it in the private sector, which is clearly a bigger sector than ours. But there's a terrible history in there of failed initiatives around
Green Deal.
Exactly. Around all that. So they keep on getting it wrong. So they need to learn how to do better. And I think if you start with our sector, to some degree, not exclusively, suggest that for a second, but sure you find organisations prepared to match fund government support.
I agree. Totally.
Let's get on with it.
Yeah, agree.
If we do terraced houses, that's the technology you can transfer into the private sector, because it's the same thing, the same physical thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it brings me on perfectly. Final point. What do you hope to achieve with Great Places in the future, and what's the vision for the next 3 to 5 years, if you set that out?
Okay, so I guess we want to be a growing organisation, to grow and not stand still. We've got work to do along the agendas we've just talked about. We want to be developing, but also we've got other priorities as well. I'd love to be able to help people get out of poverty wherever we can, through not just putting a roof over people's heads and providing a good housing offer, but also other support where it's needed. So that kind of whole community-based thing, placemaking, place shaping, regeneration, long-term programs, all those things would be brilliant, really, and that creates organisations. Back to another question you asked, that creates organisations that are interested in social purposes, the sticker right, attract the talent into the business. I just see it as a virtuous kind of circle, really, and that's what I want for Great Places, to have a virtuous circle whereby we're just doing good things and learning from our mistakes when we make them, and being brave enough and honest enough and transparent enough to accept it when we don't get things right, but overall just moving in the right direction in an interesting, exciting, innovative kind of way.
It sounds like you've never stopped doing that, to be honest. So, I mean, a lovely way for us to finish, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. I think it's an interesting journey. I think I'd like to get you back on in the future and just see where it transitions, because it sounds very interesting, the development. Might get Helen on, and just she can talk us through the sleepless nights in her development program. But thank you very much for taking your time out, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Brilliant, really enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Matt.
See you soon. Cheers.
Bye.